Here is Simland. So I figured we could just jump right in. I've been into your YouTube videos for quite a while now, and I love them. They're awesome. They're like short enough, and you do the movie clips and stuff, so they're like entertaining, but there's like a ton of science in them. And I've started to get into your podcast too, which is also great. And I've seen you've written quite a few books. I'm wondering, like, how did you get into all this stuff? Like, what got you into diet and health? Have you always eaten pretty healthy, or?
Well, I think the reason I got into it was to optimize my own kind of health and body composition as well. So, yeah, I didn't have like any issues or any health reasons. It was just personal desire to become more optimized.
Was there ever like a period of time where you like ate pretty unhealthy or anything like that, or not really? Have you always been sort of a healthy eater?
Well, yeah, probably like in childhood. I didn't like pay attention to quality nutrition or such. I just ate like cereal or ramen noodles or something like that. So I wasn't like concerned about it, and I didn't like suffer any issues from it either. So it was just nothing that I was concerned about. But yeah, maybe in high school I was just wanting what I kind of wanted to start to build muscle and do resistance training and such. So it was kind of natural to think to also be more concerned with the diet.
Yeah. So what's kind of your background? I've heard you mention in a couple of your videos something about the military. Were you in the military at some point, or?
Yeah, well, it's in Estonia. It's like a mandatory thing for men to go into the military for like it's like 8 to 12 months. So yeah, I was in the military after finishing high school, and yeah, it was a cool experience. It was fun, and that was another maybe kind of catalysts to not only wanting to improve my fitness, but also like trying to endure all of these other physical harsh conditions and some challenges.
Yeah, does that help with the discipline as well, like going through an experience like that?
Yeah, for sure. Like, well, I didn't like have any problems with discipline or habits before that.
Okay.
So I was already quite disciplined, and it's always been part of my personality. But I would imagine for someone who doesn't have any structure in their life, or who doesn't have any kind of self-control or discipline at all, then for them it's going to be quite a shift in the sense that they're going to be forced to become disciplined in the long term. And there's like a difference between self-discipline and intrinsic discipline versus something that is external discipline that is forced upon, so to say.
Yeah.
So in the military, it's like a sink or swim situation. You can't be not disciplined because otherwise you're gonna be, you're gonna do some more. You're gonna get punished, basically.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that kind of brings me into another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is your kind of catchphrase there, "Stay empowered." And I really like it, and I'm just kind of wondering what it means to you, and what kind of things besides just diet and like physical fitness help you feel empowered and keep you in that sort of state of body-mind empowerment.
Well, yeah, I do say stay empowered in all my videos, and it's kind of my personal like a motto or kind of thing that I try to live up to all the time. And what it basically means is that it's a kind of way of referring to showing up to the greatest version of yourself every day and trying to earn your laurels. So it's the idea that you're never going to be empowered in the sense that you have to stay empowered all the time continuously, and you have to constantly keep cultivating yourself and training and staying to all of those routines and habits that help you to stay healthier and be more productive and be like a better version of yourself.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So how did you get so into like all the science? Because like your stuff is some of the deepest, most detailed like science stuff I have ever come across. And as far as I know, you're not like you didn't go to school for food science or anything like that. So how did you get so into all the minutia of all the science stuff?
Well, I think that was also like maybe personal curiosity, in a sense that the reason is that also that once you start to learn about all of these things, then you will realize that there's so much to learn, and that and you will also realize that most people are actually, they don't really know what they're talking about, and they don't put their things in the right context, so to say. That there are numerous ways in the example of nutrition, how certain foods can affect your metabolism and what kind of an end result is going to have. So everything is context dependent, and most people simply want to get the easy answers, and they want to get like the immediate results. But the truth is that there isn't like one size fits solution to all, and everything is going to be determined by the context and the particular individual, their lifestyle, and like their genes. So I was simply kind of wanting to not make it so black and white, and try to seek more of like a truthful answer to all of this, like in example of diets, or and some other like biochemistry and so on. So it was like the result of kind of going into the rabbit hole literally, and constantly learning about it and being somewhat interested in it myself as well.
Yeah, when I first started getting into some of this stuff, it seemed a little bit more simple, and then once I started actually digging into some of the details, it's like it becomes, like you said, totally context dependent, where it's like something that works for somebody might not work well for somebody else, and it's just so hard to know what the quote unquote truth is. But so that kind of leads me to this. There's a lot of hype about like low carb eating or keto diet. I'm just wondering, like from your perspective, why not eating a ton of carbs all the time? Like, why is eating low carb or even keto beneficial?
Well, I would say that if you, let's say, somewhat of a low carb or a keto diet is going to help the person to maintain a somewhat of a lower insulin state, where your blood sugar is also lower, and you don't experience these ups and downs or the blood sugar swings throughout the entire day. And one of the best kind of things for your health is to have like more stable blood sugar levels and more stable insulin levels throughout the day as well. So the reason why a lot of the modern diseases are kind of rooted in chronically elevated levels of insulin. It's called like hyperinsulinemia, and like diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. Those things, they're rooted in like chronically elevated insulin. And with a low carb diet, you essentially take out one of the biggest factors that is causing those things, such as like insulin and such. And it's also like somewhat of a productivity thing for me personally, in that I don't feel like tired, I don't feel hungry during the day, and I'm able to still like burn my own body fat all the time. And that's essentially the biggest benefits that I see. That it's not necessary to be on a low carb keto diet all the time, but I would say that the vast majority of the time you still want to maintain somewhat of a lower level of insulin and like suppressed blood sugar as well to a certain extent, because in the past, or like in nature, the human or humans, they didn't have access to like 3 square meals a day, and they would naturally, fast, and they would naturally have like a lower eating frequency, and that itself would keep their blood sugar and insulin healthy, so to say. The problem simply is that in the modern world, eating too frequently is going to keep the insulin higher all the time. And if you especially have those meals with higher carbs and you're not restricting your carbs at all, then it simply causes the situation where the body is it's like the default or the basal level of insulin is going to be higher all the time, and insulin or the blood sugar as well. And with a keto diet, you mimic some aspects of the fasted physiology, that you're suppressing your insulin and you're keeping your blood sugar in check.
One of the other things I would imagine we would have had in the natural world in the past was more metabolic flexibility, where it's easier for us to burn our fat for energy when we don't have food. And so that's something I'm pretty interested in, and other people call it fat adaptation. And I'm just wondering, what are the benefits of being fat adapted, and how can somebody who is like totally glucose dependent, that eats like a high carb, modern American diet, how can someone like that start to cultivate that fat adaptation?
Yeah, well, first of all, like the fat adaptation is simply like a term that describes the person's increased ability to use fat and ketones as a fuel source, and it's often accompanied by like being able to go longer periods of time without eating and not feeling tired or not feeling hypoglycemic in between meals. So you basically become like bonk proof against fasting, and bonk proof against the carb restriction as well, and you will maintain higher levels of mental clarity. So the ways of promoting it is to either practice intermittent fasting or eating like a low carb keto diet. Exercise itself also promotes it just by virtue of burning fatty acids for fuel, but it's not like if you can't sidestep the other prerequisites, which would be like either intermittent fasting or a low carb keto diet in some shape or form. So to say, the lower your carb intake, then the higher proportion of the fuel that you use will have to come from either fat or ketones. So usually the best place to start is to, at least for a short period of time, go through these periods of keto adaptation, where you restrict your carbs completely and you kind of force the body to go into deeper ketosis. And after a while, the kind of fat adaptation builds up, and the mitochondria, they get more efficient at using fat for fuel. And the fasting can also help. And the fasting is kind of the most natural and most forceful way of pushing ketosis. But in the long term, you can't really fast for that long. And you have to eat at some point. And, although I would say that fasting would be more important than eating keto, but kind of combining them both together would give you like the ultimate fat adaptation benefit.
How long do you think? I'm sure it varies depending on a person's history in their body and everything, but roughly like how long eating a keto diet will it take for somebody to be like pretty well fat adapted, where they could, go back to eating carbs for a week or two and then not have a huge problem getting back into ketosis if they were to fast or something like that?
Well, it's going to depend on primarily like where are they coming from, so or how deranged their metabolism is at that point. So if someone has diabetes or insulin resistance or they're obese, then it's a sign that they're quite hyperinsulinemic, and they don't rarely go. It's going to be more difficult for them to enter into ketosis and become fat adapted. And for someone who is exercising, who is eating like somewhat of a lower carb diet, maybe like a paleo diet, then for them it's going to be simply much easier, and it's less strenuous on the body as well. So it's kind of varies. if you think about, okay, if you are already fat adapted, then you still have to kind of maintain it to almost like on a consistent basis, so to say that you may get away with eating carbs like a few days, but probably like if you stretch it out to like a week, then it's going to decrease the fat adaptation to the point that your body will change its metabolic pathways or metabolic processes again. So it's a good idea to dip in and out of ketosis by having some carbs every once in a while, but you don't want to stretch it out for that long by going for carbs several days in a row and so on.
So what do you think about like keto diet for a long-term strategy? Do you think that makes sense?
Well, I do think that you definitely can practice a keto diet for like years and decades even without no real health issues. So there simply hasn't been like any studies on it in that long term. But the short-term studies all show that metabolic health improves, biomarkers improve, body composition improves, and I would say that it's a pretty healthy diet. But maybe like ideally or for optimal results, you still want to practice some form of metabolic flexibility and either do some form of like the cyclical keto diet where every once in a while you consume some carbs to like deliberately kick yourself out of ketosis and to still keep the body adaptable and guessing.
So I just listened to one of your podcasts with Mike Mutzner, I think his name is, and he was mentioning a bit about kind of seasonal carbs. Do you think that's a good idea? Like, eating carbs if they're more in season, where especially like people like you and I think we have pretty harsh winters where in the natural world we wouldn't have really had access to many carbs throughout the winter. Mm-hmm. But obviously in the fall and in the summer we would have some.
Yeah. Well, I do think that some aspect of seasonal eating is a good idea, especially if you're trying to only eat your local foods, and it's a good idea to try to eat according to your genes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That there is some ancestry that plays a part, so to say that if you're living in the north, then you probably don't really do that well, or you wouldn't be like fully optimized on a like equatorial diet, and vice versa. So there are some genes that play a part, and some seasonality is also a good idea. But I think that thing, it doesn't have to be taken like in a literal sense that you have to literally eat only. Like during the winter, you would have to only eat like the foods that you could get in your local environment. That part, it would be probably something along the lines of that. You can kind of cycle those seasonality within a week or something like that. You can speed those things up, just to kind of, you wouldn't want to kind of combine all of these different macronutrients and different food groups that have like conflicting seasonality. So to say, you wouldn't want to eat a bunch of, let's say, for example, like a winter food would be things like animal foods like meat and fowl and fish and these fermented foods that you have to preserve. You wouldn't want to have those winter foods with summer foods together, like the summer foods being things like fruit and vegetables and berries and things that require like more sunlight. You wouldn't want to combine them together, but you can safely consume them even during the winter months, but you have to make sure that you're not having them together at the same time, so to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And why is that?
Well, essentially, your body is always kind of prioritizing certain fuel sources, and if you have like fats and carbs together, then it will also promote the storage of fat as body fat directly, because of the carbs are gonna elevate insulin, and it simply predisposes you to be more in the storage mode, so to say that. In nature you would have higher levels of insulin during the summer and autumn, where there's more fruit and carbs, and you wouldn't get fat from animal foods that much because the fats tend to be eaten during the winter months. So if insulin is high, then the body is supposed to store energy and get fat for the winter. Mm-hmm. So and having fat together with insulin is being the storage hormone. Higher levels of insulin will make the body more prone to store the food as fat. So that's like one of the examples, but it can also be taken further that combining, or let's say if you're eating carbs and fats together or proteins together, then it may potentially oxidize those fats and protein as well and cause like glycation, which will increase the amount of advanced glycation end products in your bloodstream, and that can cause like more oxidative stress and more inflammation. And if you oxidize the fats and potentially the cholesterol in that food, then that oxidized cholesterol can also increase your risk of heart disease, so to say, that it develops the formation of plaques. Unoxidized cholesterol is perfectly fine. In most cases, like it's not linked to cardiovascular disease. Only like oxidized cholesterol, especially, is where the danger is. And if you have high amounts of carbs and fats together, then you may potentially oxidize the cholesterol.
Makes sense why fast food would be so bad for you then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
People are eating big, juicy burgers with soft drinks and all that. Mm-hmm. You eat OMAD, right? A 20-hour fasting window and then a 4-hour eating window. Is that right?
Yes, somewhat along the lines of that. Yeah, maybe like 20 hours is kind of the minimum, and 20, 22, somewhere there.
Okay. That's probably the furthest you go with anything like that, and there are other types of intermittent fasting. Why is the restricted eating window like important, and how can somebody who doesn't have any experience with that just kind of get started with it?
I think it goes back to, again, keeping the insulin and blood sugar low most of the time. That's the kind of easiest benefit of that. And also the other kind of longevity boosting benefits are linked to like a lower eating frequency, because it will suppress some of the insulin, but also like suppresses IGF-1 and these things called mTOR, which essentially kind of keep the body in a repair mode, where it can recycle its own junk material through this process called autophagy, and that simply keeps you more youthful and also eliminates all the pathogens and other kind of disease and cancer cells that may float around in the system. And in a fasted state, you will essentially cause like self-healing and self-repair.
So like constantly eating, you're kind of telling the body that you're in building mode, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you have high insulin and even like if you're eating like very frequently on a low carb diet, then you're staying in this build mode and growing mode that inhibits the process of repair.
I have started to do some of that for a while now. It's kind of random though. I don't have a real set schedule with it. I'm also like a really thin guy. How do you make sure you get like all the calories you need? And if you are really thin and you don't need to lose any weight, if anything, you could maybe handle gaining a little weight, but you still are eating low carb and keto. Like what's a good way to make sure you're getting your calories and make sure you're, at a good weight?
Mm-hmm. Well, on the keto diet, it's somewhat easier to do because the foods themselves are more nutrient dense, and they're also, or you can make the food more calorie dense as well. So you don't have to be afraid of these fattier pieces of meat or the fish that you would want to be. If you're struggling with getting calories, then you can safely eat like these, pork belly or steak, and you don't have to eat chicken breast. You can eat the chicken with the skin and the drumsticks and so on. And you don't have to eat like tilapia. You get to eat like salmon and sardines, those sorts of things. So those foods, they are higher in calories, but they're also more nutrient dense, that you're getting more of the micronutrients and all the essential amino acids and fatty acids. So you can simply try to opt in for like all of the juiciest and more calorie dense food choices on keto. And even then, if you're still eating like the vegetables, then you can add like some extra fats on there. I don't know, like some olive oil, maybe a little bit of butter or MCT oil, and avocados. Those things there. Fat is the most calorie dense macronutrient. It has the highest amounts of calories, and it's also like satiating. So it's some people may find more difficult to overeat on keto because they don't get hungry even.
So when you have your 4-hour eating window, do you eat like multiple times in that window, or is it just like one giant meal? Or
usually it's like it's probably like 2 meals something, but it's simply like in a very tight window within like 2 to 3 hours and such. So the foods that I do eat are like primarily some eggs and some meat and fish, and then some salads and vegetables. So I also eat like some of the fermented foods like sauerkraut and pickles and such, because they're pretty good for the microbiome and the gut health as well.
Yep. So I want to jump back to autophagy, because that's something you talk about a lot. You just put out a book called Metabolic Autophagy in February, right?
Yeah.
Just a quick rundown of what autophagy is and why it's important.
Well, as I just mentioned before, that autophagy is the cellular recycling process, and it literally means self-eating. And during this time, your healthy cells are recycling the old and worn-out kind of organelles and components of the cell that are causing inflammation and causing oxidative stress. So you essentially eat them away and eliminate them, and this will have like a bunch of longevity boosting benefits. And a lot of the benefits of caloric restriction on increasing lifespan are caused by autophagy, so to say, that if you don't have autophagy and you still eat fewer calories, then you may not boost your longevity, versus if you have autophagy activated and you go and you restrict your calories, then you will see those benefits. So you can even say that you don't need to essentially restrict your calories as long as you have autophagy activated with things like intermittent fasting and extended fasting every once in a while. So it's a pretty anti-aging process that has many other benefits as well.
So I would imagine it's autophagy is a state that we would have been in fairly frequently in nature in the past. Do people even get into autophagy anymore if they're just eating like a standard kind of glucose-driven diet and they don't practice any type of fasting or anything like that?
I think, like the average person and most people rarely even get into autophagy because, first of all, I don't really know any of my family members or any of my close friends who have ever kind of gone an entire day without eating.
Sure.
So yeah, that's one aspect of it, that no one is doing intermittent fasting, and also that their eating frequency is also quite high, and they stay in the fed state basically like most of the day. So starting from having something in the morning, like even just a splash of milk and a coffee, and ending with things like having a few snacks before going to bed. So they're in this chronically fed state, and it takes time to go into the fasted state, and it takes even more time to activate autophagy. So if you go to bed and you sleep like 8 hours, and you haven't eaten for maybe like 10 to 12 hours, then by that time you're not gaining essentially no autophagy at all. And that's the time where also people kind of break their fasted state in the morning by having some carbs and that's also going to inhibit ketosis. And yeah, I would say that that's one of the reasons why there is so much kind of metabolic diseases in the modern world, that people are staying in this hyperinsulinemia state and they don't tap into the fasted state at all.
Does time restricted feeding get you into any type of autophagy at all, or do you have to go extended fast for something like that?
You may get some autophagy with like daily time restricted eating, but as long as it's going to depend on also like what's the overall metabolic status, and things that can also speed it up are eating like a low carb diet and exercising and cold exposure and heat exposure as well. So you can speed up the process, and if you're healthier, then you will go into it faster. Yeah, the thing is that you simply have to kind of become fat adapted first to make it easier.
I didn't know that the cold and heat exposure increased that as well. Why is that?
Well, basically, the cold is going to suppress the insulin and IGF-1 pathway, and it's also raises the other kind of fuel sensor called AMPK, which is like a prerequisite for autophagy, and it's going to, those things get activated during times of energy stress. So your body will simply kind of detect that it's deprived of energy, and in order to survive, it has to kind of really dig deep into the preservation mode. And one of the processes of that is autophagy as well.
Okay. Cool. That's awesome. I like the cold exposure stuff, so that's another added benefit of that. How can somebody tell? I mean, it's probably an individual thing, but maybe you have some types of tips on it. I don't know. How can you tell when you're getting too much of that hermetic stress, or that stress from doing things like fasting or heat exposure or anything like that? I know it can be a really good thing, and most people don't get any of that. So like, how can somebody tell when they're maybe taking it too far, where they should like stop a fast or increase their calories, or what would you suggest for that?
Well, yeah, I think everything that is this hormetic stress, it has to be taken at the right dose, and the right dose or the optimal amount of it is going to depend on the person and how adapted they are to dealing with the stress. So for someone who hasn't done any intermittent fasting, then for them doing like one meal a day is going to be pretty difficult, not to mention like a 3-day fast. But for someone who has already become fat adapted, then a 1-day fast is probably pretty easy, and the 3-day fast and such is also going to be easier. And some signs of too much stress are, again, feeling very tired, and also like suffering some forms of hypothyroidism, or feeling very cold all the time, and also they don't have like any energy left to do anything else. That's one of the easiest or the most common side effects of doing intermittent fasting, is that the person's thyroid really kind of lowers and decreases, and it's simply caused by the additional stress on the body. And after a while it may get better, so to say, that the body gets you more used to it, and it's not going to cause that much stress on them anymore. Some other things that people can pay attention to is like muscle loss, or feeling very weak at the gym, so to say, not being able to perform. That's another sign that the body is under too much energy stress and it's not able to perform. And that's another thing that can get better after a while, if you become more fat adapted, so to say, that it's going to be easier for you to produce energy from fatty acids, and also like exercise during the fasted state even. So that's the kind of second thing to look at, and both of them can be fixed by trying to take things more slower, but still kind of developing it further and promoting the fat adaptation.
What is a good way for someone who has never experimented with any type of intermittent fasting or extended fasting to get started with that stuff? Like, what's a good first step towards, because I look at 5-day fasts and the deep autophagy benefits. I mean, I've heard countless things about how great it is, but that I'm still a ways off from a 5-day fast. I've done a day and maybe a day and a half, like 36 hours or something. How do you work your way up to one of those longer fasts safely?
Well, I think you kind of build it up by step, that you gradually increase the length of the fast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's probably not a good idea to jump straight into a 5-day fast. But if you've already fasted for longer than 24 hours, then you probably can already fast for like 3 days with no problems. So to say that the most difficult part is the 24-hour mark and going to bed without eating. So that there's like the psychological trauma that also occurs, that you're afraid of going into bed hungry.
Yeah.
But after you've done it, then it's gonna be somewhat easier and more tolerable. And going to bed on the second day is gonna be also much easier. So yeah, usually the way I started was I did like first a 24-hour fast, then a 48-hour fast, and then a 3-day fast, and then a 5-day fast, and so on. So it's always like I would say it's better and smarter to kind of build it up step by step. And yeah, for someone who hasn't done anything, then for them the first step would be to simply practice like the some form of time restricted eating, where you fast for 16 hours and you eat your food within 8 hours. And that basically means that you skip breakfast and you have it later in the day.
Mm-hmm. Is a 5-day fast easy for you now, would you say? Are you comfortable with it, or is it still challenging?
Well, I would say it's pretty easy in a sense that it doesn't cause like any fear or anxiety or turmoil or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it's not causing any kind of weakness or lethargy either. Like I would still be able to work out, and I would still be able to move around and do everything else. So it's not like traumatizing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the only kind of thing that gets in the way of people is that it's like somewhat easier and comfortable to simply eat rather than not to, so to say.
Yeah, it seems like one of the biggest parts of it is the mental aspect. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
So have you ever had any like negative effects from fasting ever, or like anything that just made you stop before you planned?
I wouldn't probably have stopped like because of something. There hasn't been like anything that is kind of forces me to stop.
Sure.
Like a beforehand, but some potential things that may make some people stop are like either they feel very hungry or they feel like very cold or very uncomfortable, or someone gets some form of some stomach pain or something like that. If a person gets hungry, then it can be easily fixed by either having some water, because hydration is also, it can make like dehydration can cause like some hunger cravings. And then there are some other things that can also suppress appetite, like teas or coffee, and those things would be allowed during the fasting window. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, do you want to have salt with your water when you're fasting, or?
Yeah, it would be like a good idea to get some electrolytes and minerals, and that would also kind of stave off the lethargy and exhaustion, so to say, that you would feel more energized if you had some salts.
Okay. What are your like go-to carbs that you like to eat when you do have carbs, and like what's kind of your average amount of like grams wise of carbs that you would eat in a day?
My kind of go-to carbs are these whole food carb sources, like some potatoes, some tubers, beetroot, and maybe like a little bit of fruit, some berries. And yeah, that's essentially it. Like I don't really go for these kind of different grains or beans or lectins. or legumes and those sort of things. I primarily get my carbs from like potatoes and such.
So what's like the highest carb you do, like highest amount of carbs you do, like when you just kind of do carbs to change it up?
Well, maybe like there isn't like a real upper limit. I would say that or this limit where it's the best. So to say that if you're already breaking ketosis with some carbs, then you can get away with a lot more.
Sure.
And if you are already doing it, then it may be worthwhile to have a little bit of more carbs. And maybe on those carb refeed days, I may get like 200 to 300 and somewhere around there. Like I'm not pushing it, but I'm not trying to restrict it either.
Sure. And then do you always make sure you get like a intense workout in around those carbs, or?
Yeah, usually, yeah. Like if I'm already eating carbs, then having a heavier workout before that is going to make those carbs more easily absorbed. So to say that those carbs will be used primarily for recovery and muscle glycogen resynthesis, rather than fat storage or kicking yourself out of ketosis. So to say that if I haven't worked out, then I would much rather prefer to still eat like a low carb keto template.
Is there any ever like foods that you have, like a guilty pleasure food, anything that you indulge on, any kind of like junk food or anything like that, or are you just totally off of that?
Well, I would say, yeah, maybe I do have like some ice cream every once in a while on those carb refeeds, like regular ice cream. And maybe I also do think that it's a good idea to expose yourself to these certain foods that aren't that healthy, like some gluten and some bread and such, just so you wouldn't become intolerant to them, so to say, and your body would be able to absorb it and deal with it, so to say. You don't want to become gluten intolerant just because of eating paleo or keto. So
right.
That's a potential danger that may occur, and I would much rather maintain this sort of a flexibility. And yeah, in practice, that means that having a piece of cake at some birthdays or Christmas is perfectly fine, and it's not gonna wreck you as long as you make it a habit.
Sure. So I'm a person who already had some issues with gluten in the first place, so that's why I really don't eat it. You think even it could be a benefit every once in a while just to remind your body that it exists, or?
Well, if you already have something, if you already are somewhat intolerant to gluten, then in that case it may not be the best idea, just because it's gonna trigger like an autoimmune response, which may keep you off the track for like longer, like several days in a row and such. But for some, it's mainly used, or the idea is that for healthy people who don't have these issues, then to stay healthy, then they would maybe want to introduce it every once in a while. But optimally, you would still, it's gluten and those other potential allergens. There's something that I don't see like any reason to be keeping them in a diet on like a consistent basis, so to say, that they're not essential and they're not having like any significant benefit either. And you're much better off by not having them. But still every once in a while, just so you wouldn't accidentally get wiped out and go into a coma just because of eating some I don't know, potatoes in some soup or some gluten at a birthday party.
So a lot of people, there are plenty of people I know that are still very much like eat a standard diet, like 3 meals a day or more, like bread with every meal, potentially like soda pops or any other sweets and stuff on the side of that. And then they want to change their diet or they want to lose weight, and they get drawn to something like keto or intermittent fasting, but they end up, it just gets more complicated because they're just like adding more fats in, but then they still struggle to break free from their old habits, and then they'll have all these sweets or do whatever. Like, what's just the like simplest way you'd suggest for somebody to get started on just like transforming their diet? Maybe instead of just trying to jump in headfirst to some like totally different diet?
Well, yeah, maybe going like a step by step is another kind of easy way of doing it. So you definitely want to remove all of the processed foods in your diet, anything that is processed and that has like a bunch of added sugars and grains and such. So maybe like the paleo diet is a pretty good start, because with that you already eliminate like 80% of the junk and the potential dangers. So yeah, the paleo diet is a good thing, but then if they want to delve deeper into the world of keto and such, then after that you would simply eliminate all of the high carb foods as well that are still paleo proof, like some sweet potatoes or rice or fruits and such, and just eat like some animal products, animal foods, like meats and eggs and fish and some vegetables. So that's like the keto diet is essentially just like some meat and vegetables.
Yeah, it's like a low carb paleo basically.
Yeah.
Do you track much of your macros or like test for ketones or get blood work done or anything at this point, or are you pretty much just like intuitive about all that stuff?
I do track my blood glucose and ketones maybe like maybe every other week or so, because it's not like that important, and I'm not kind of doing anything that may cause some issues or something that I already know that this works and that this keeps me function well. The blood tests, those are another things that everyone maybe wants to do, or it should be done like a few times a year just to keep in track of their health. But if you're not changing things drastically, then there's not going to be like that big of a reason to have them that often either. So yeah, it seems like a regular checkup is a good idea, like at least once or twice a year.
Sure. With your OMAD schedule, the 1 meal a day, the 20 and 4, your other types of fast, do you kind of like have those on a schedule, or do you just do them whenever, or what's kind of your theory behind that?
Usually I try to, occasionally I have those extended fasts when I'm like traveling or something, because it will be easier to, skip the food and get a fast in. But on a routine basis, I try to aim for like maybe a 3-day fast once a quarter. So that will end up in getting like about 4 3-day fasts a year, and maybe like a few shorter ones as well, like a 48-hour fast every other month or once a month or so, depending on the schedule, so to say.
Okay, cool. So I mentioned your new book earlier, the Metabolic Autophagy. How's that one being like received? What do people think of it?
Well, the feedback has been pretty good, and a lot of people have found it very useful and helpful. So yeah, it's a pretty well. I would say that it's a good overview and a good kind of master's guide to doing intermittent fasting and becoming like fat adapted, for not only with diet but also like exercise, and it teaches you essentially how do you optimize autophagy, what's the specific amount depending on the situation, and what kind of food stimulate it, and how would you like to structure these fasts in your everyday life. So it's like a really good blueprint for optimizing intermittent fasting and kind of becoming a master at it. I would say.
That's awesome. I definitely want to check that out. One more thing I wanted to ask you. What do you think of the fasting mimicking diet?
Well, I think it's a pretty good thing, or it's a cool thing you can have every once in a while, and maybe it could be more sustainable for the majority of people. But like compared to like a regular fast where you're not consuming any calories, then you would probably get more of the therapeutic benefits and more autophagy as well. So originally the fasting mimicking diet was done for people who kind of struggle with fasting for some reason, who aren't doing it at all, and for like the older population and such. So yeah, but I would say that for someone who really wants to, become fat adapted more and also, optimize autophagy more, then for them, like regular fast would be even better. And, there's this thing that the fasting mimicking diet lasts for like 5 days. You still get to eat, but the foods are really like low in calorie, and they are filling maybe, but they may not satiate you that completely. So me personally, I would think that you with a regular 3-day fast or a 5-day fast, you get the job done faster, and you will also reap the benefits much more.
So a person like me, I'm probably right on the borderline of like being underweight. Is there anything I would want to do, like, to make sure that my fast is going to be safe,
Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, it's easier to fast if you have like a little bit of extra body fat with you.
Mm-hmm.
So like before going into the fast, then it's definitely a good idea to a few days before that increase your caloric content and to kind of fill up your nutrient storage. You don't necessarily have to get fat, but there are still like certain nutrients that also regulate how you feel during the fast, like magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, and like we mentioned, like the sodium that you would take during the fast. So with the fasting, it has to be intermittent, and it also has to be coupled with adequate nutrition afterwards. So you wouldn't become like deficient of those nutrients. So fasting is perfectly safe as long as you kind of buffer it out with adequate nutrition before and afterwards as well.
Sure. So I mentioned your book. You've got awesome YouTube channel with tons of videos, a podcast, and then you've got some free ebooks on your website. And what else should people check out? Do you have any new projects in the works? Where should people find you?
Well, on all of the social media platforms, it's Siim Lund, and my blog is also siimlund.com. So yeah, I have YouTube, and you can definitely find out the podcast and on the website as well, and on YouTube.
Awesome. And what are you working on right now? Anything new or?
At the moment, I'm simply spreading the word more and focusing on promotion of all the content that I already have.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate it, Tim.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
That was Simland. Check him out at simland.com. Simland on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Body Mind Empowerment Podcast with Simland. And this is Awake, Aware, Alive. And I am your host, Jacob Gossel. Check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Give me a follow, a like, a share, review on iTunes, subscribe.